Welcome everyone to this parallel event by the International Coalition for the Abolition of Surrogate Motherhood. My name is Clara Berglund and I am the Secretary General of the Swedish Women's Lobby, which is an independent umbrella organization for the women's movement in Sweden, and we are also a proud member of the coalition. Surrogate motherhood is incompatible with women's full human rights and gender equality. During last year, the closed borders and restrictions due to COVID-19 has further revealed the exploitative nature of this global industry that profits on vulnerable women. Tonight, we will listen to interventions from 3 experts that will discuss the medical, psychological, and legal consequences of surrogacy, as well as what can be done to stop this growing trade in women and children. We will listen to Yagmur Yurakisi, who is a feminist activist from the Radical Girls Network for girls and young women with a migrant background in Europe that have come together to fight for the liberation of women and girls from patriarchal structures and mentalities. And tonight, Yagmur will talk about the dissociation and coping mechanisms for women and for surrogate mothers. Please go ahead, Yagmur.
Thank you very much. So good evening. I will build on a lot of what Anna Luana has been speaking about, and I will try to zoom out a bit to include other issues of male violence and to understand surrogacy's place within that. I'm bearing in mind Kathleen Berry's warning against single issue feminism. All the pieces matter and they are all linked to each other. And it's only when we look at those different links that we can understand surrogacy's role under patriarchy. And actually this parcelization of issues within feminism itself is a mirror of what I would like to talk about today, this phenomenon that Anna Luana, you have also mentioned, which is dissociation. So dissociation is a psychological phenomenon that occurs when a person is in a situation of extreme danger with no escape. So say a man is beating you up, he is raping you, he is torturing you. What do? You try to evade with your mind. You try to pretend you are not there and it is not happening to you. And it is widely observed for women in prostitution, and I think it's the most clear example of it. So Kajsa Ekman as well, she's worked a lot on it. And she, for example, identifies the fact that women in prostitution give a different name from their own as a way to dissociate themselves from the act. So to pretend it is not happening to themselves, to try to preserve their true self. So it's not so much about protecting your anonymity, but really protecting yourself. And Kajsa Ekman talks about the split self, because dissociation tries to achieve the impossible. It tries to split the body from the mind. So obviously, when you try a process like this, there are consequences, and you lose a part of yourself in that. I'm thinking about the Irish activist Rachel Moran. In her book Paid For: My Journey Through Prostitution, she explains that she's lost, because of the male violence that she has to suffer, she has lost the ability to dance. A part of you is gone when you have to split from yourself. And we see that a lot as well in surrogacy. So we hear that from women who have to give up their child. One of them says, I am an incubator. And those words should horrify us, because she's not saying I'm a woman, I'm a mother. She says, I'm a thing, I'm an incubator. And the whole discourse surrounding surrogacy assumes and implies and is based on this idea of dissociation. So we have women as ovens, and even in English, labor, you labor the land. So we have this idea of pregnancy as something completely passive. You just wait there, you're the land, and the man inseminates and nothing happens for 9 months, but we know in reality which of the two sexes is much more passive in pregnancy. We also have expressions like third-party reproduction. What does that even mean? I mean, for all I know, it could be somebody doing a painting, a reproduction of a famous painting. Third-party reproduction. We have womb rental, and I will come back on that one. And we have my favorite of all, outsourcing pregnancy. So it's as if you could take parts of a woman and outsource pregnancy. And again, here it's also a reference to labor, both manual work and labor as pregnancy. So this reminds me, this idea that the parts are split from the whole, it makes me think about German Greer's saying that girls are born whole. But we are progressively dissociated, split from ourselves and from other women. We are fragmented. This is what Janice Raymond would talk about. So we have first, obviously, this mind-body dissociation. And we all know women are bodies without mind. And we've had tons of male intellectuals who've repeated that for years and years. And within this first distinction, mind-body, we then have further fragmentation within the body itself. And each part here, it's a tentative, it's a non-exhaustive list as well, unfortunately, of various industries and practices that have taken fragments away from women. And what happens of this mindless body, it's there to fulfill a function. Each part of this body is there to fulfill a function. This is what objects do. So from fragmentation, we arrive to objectification. So now there is something, so I have obviously made Janice Raymond's thought much more simpler here to not go into details, but there is something that she talks about, but she doesn't actually name, which I think is very relevant here. And it's actually two figures of speech. So one of them is called the synecdoche and the other a metonymy. And you could say they're closely related to each other. You could even say the one is part of the other, but it's just a general view of these figures of speeches. And what they do, we use them all the time without realizing. So synecdoche is part for the whole. So when we say number 10, we're using the street number to designate the cabinet of the prime minister. When we use a metonymy, it goes through association. So if I'm saying, for example, I'm reading a Renate Klein, everybody knows I'm not actually reading Renate Klein. I'm reading a book by Renate Klein. And this is what happens in the language of surrogacy, exactly. So I've talked about womb rental before. Womb rental is a form of synecdoche. You have the part for the whole. You have part of the womb that is used to designate the mother and the woman. And then we have the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, who is talking about mothers as gestational carriers. And then it becomes carrier. We don't know what these women are carrying. We have no idea. For all we know, we could be talking about delivery boys, And then there is a further step in that it becomes GC. Part for the whole, association rather. Actually, this is more of a metonymy because it's function for the whole. GC. Where is the mother? Where is the woman? And because those parts have been so split from the whole that we have lost woman. Now let's take a further step back and discuss about procreation more generally, because this sort of practice, the synecdoche, we see it a lot when we talk about procreation. So we have those expressions like uterus havers, cervix havers, vagina holders. All of those are synecdoches. And we have those people who menstruate, menstruators, more of a metonymy. And we have lost the woman. So it's as if those experiences, those unique experiences to women are happening independently of us. So Clue is this sort of app website that helps you regulate your cycle. And I wouldn't trust them the same way that I wouldn't trust this American Society for Reproductive Medicine. And there is something very telling here in that they say that female is dehumanizing. Now, what can a woman understand when she hears that the word female is dehumanizing? Well, I assume that it takes the humanity away. So I assume that perhaps female humans don't exist. Perhaps women don't exist. Perhaps women are not human. Is that, this is the logic that I would go through with my mindless body. And it goes, this expression here, this is very telling. Female is dehumanizing. It goes at the crux of the matter, because I myself have urged for a long time on this issue of dehumanization. But what is really happening here is dewomanization. So I'm trying something here. Okay, I'm trying to stop the share. This is a nightmare, apologies. Okay, thank you. So dewomanizing. So what do I mean by this? When I hear things like surrogacy is a human rights violation, yes, of course, because women are human. But it's not accurate, because as what you were saying, Ana Luana, it's a violence that can be exclusively done to women, because only women can become pregnant. Mankind is an incorporation, humankind, and assimilation. So we understand the problem of talking about mankind for both women and men, because it's this idea, Adam's rib, women are part of men. So if you talk about men, you're talking about women as well. But humanity as well is an assimilation in the sense that it erases the differences between the two sexes, and it comes back to this oneness, as if there was one sex. So let me make sense of this. So I always hear people saying, oh, but why should sex be such an important variable? I mean, why are we not as obsessed with people's eye colors? Well, because you can't make babies with your eyes. The sexual differences are at the heart of the perpetuation of the species. They are relevant differences, and they remind us that the two sexes are asymmetric. Now, this dewomanization, to relate back to dissociation. So when we were talking about dissociation, I said that the woman, the individual woman who has to endure this process of splitting herself from herself, loses a part of herself. So when we translate dissociation at the global level for all women, the conclusion of your talk, Ana Luana, thank you, it follows perfectly. Dissociation is the process whereby we lose our womanity. This is what we're talking about. And it took me, this is a concept that a friend of mine, Liliana Ricci, told me years ago. And I hadn't understood until I heard Céline Picq, a French feminist, say that pornography is the systematic destruction of women. And words like, and it's the same with surrogacy. It can only happen to women because only women can be pregnant. Breast ironing can only happen to women. Female sexual and genital mutilation can only happen to women. In fact, what is the difference between circumcision and mutilation? It's the sex. And here again, with surrogacy, we have a systematic destruction of women. Exploitation is not enough as a concept, because it's not, the problem is not that we're extracting more than we should. The problem is that this is butchery. This is splitting parts of women and splitting women across among each of us. So this is when we have those expressions, when we have this process of the part for the whole, the synecdoche, this metonymy, our womanity is at stake. And we need to invent our own words, because language is also ours. And if we're not bold in our speech, we won't be bold anywhere else. We're losing our womanity with all those attacks that are ongoing against us, but we will push back. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Jagmur. So we should do exactly what the surrogacy industry has been doing all along. It's inventing new words like womb rental. So now it's our turn to do the same, to define that this is in fact sex-based violence. I want to ask you, some advocates of surrogacy point to the issue of consent. What do you think about that? Is it possible to consent to renting out your womb?
The way you framed it, it almost seems like a rhetorical question. So there are, in the feminist criticism of consent, a lot of the time we're picked on the sociological criticism, when I think we're trying to make a political criticism of the notion of consent. So I'm not going to talk about surrogacy specifically, but what I want to say about consent, because I've had it up here of consent, I'm done with it. It will apply to all of those different cases where we bring about women's consent. So when we say, so pregnancy, so because we're talking about pregnancy, it is clear that it is sexually determined, right? So when I hear, for example, in prostitution, oh, but some women choose it or consent to it. Well, they always tell me women, they never tell me men. So even in their answer, it's sexually determined. Here in this case, it's a bit cheating because from the beginning, it's sexually determined. And then when you tell them, well, look, it seems a bit weird that only women are into this. Could there be a psychosocial explanation? Could there be a sort of rearing that explained this? Now, the criticism, so this is the sociological criticism of consent. So you're inquiring into what led you to consent to it. And the reply you get back is, but if we say this, we're socially determined and we have no choice and we can't even decide for ourselves and all of this. So first, those people who say this, they have to explain the empirical reality that is somehow, so the women that are abused in childhood, the poorest women, the most racially discriminated against women that end up in prostitution. So this is an empirical reality that it is not chosen or consented. So even that is easy to demonstrate. But this is not really the key problem with consent. Consent is problematic from the political point of view. Because consent gives, and this is really the criticism of Catherine McKinnon, the way I understand it, and it's saying, look, you have this framework and you can agree or disagree with it. And that is the only option you have. But there is no criticism or no analysis of the framework. There is no inquiry of how the framework came about. And I'm sorry, this is taking a while, but this is, I think, crucial. And this is one thing. And the other thing is that the idea that consent can make the difference between right and wrong is flawed. So for example, if I consent to my torture, it is still torture and it is still harmful. Consent only becomes relevant, as I see it, when you're talking about a practice that is not harmful per se. So if somebody takes a picture of me, it's fine, it's not harmful, they took a photography. But if I did not consent to it, then it's problematic. But the photography per se is not problematic. But either way, the fact that I consented or I did not consent does not change the fact of the nature of the act. It is still taking a photography, it is still torture. And this is why the criticism of rape laws through consent. So consent can never modify the nature of the act. So how can it suddenly turn sex into rape? It's a fallacy, really. It's based on nothing. It's an empty notion. And because we have this whole political culture based on consent, which is about legitimizing a practice, but not inquiring on its nature, we end up with what you were talking about, Ana Luana, regulation. Because you're trying to change the circumstances and make them better when really it's the heart of the practice. It is inherently wrong. Sorry, it was long and twisted.
No, it's very interesting. I wanted to follow up on that actually, because we had a question that went like this. A friend of mine was a surrogate mother twice in Canada, and she felt so honored to give those women a child. Are you against this also? I can see being against surrogacy as to sell babies, and that would be horrible. I was wondering maybe if you could comment on that question, and perhaps also that your criticism of consent does that hold up also in surrogacy arrangement where there is no money exchange like the altruistic surrogacy situations? What do you think about that?
So again, this money, I'll start with that one because it's easier. Kajsa Ekman has a brilliant answer to that. It's saying, oh, you're exploiting it, but you're doing it for free. So it's less of an exploitation. I mean, what kind of twisted logic is this? And again, the crux of the problem is not really we're still discussing about circumstances and can we do this and can we do that? But the problem is that you're asking a woman who is penniless to give up her baby. This is what is happening. You know, it's like Rachel Moran, when she says, when a woman is hungry, the human decent thing to do is to put bread in her mouth, not your penis. So when you put prostitution like this, it's clear what's going on. And in the individual level, okay, you're happy, but that act has consequences on me. This is why we have law. This is why we have the rule of law, because we're not individual particles and we cannot do as we wish, even if it makes us happy. It has consequences on other women. I hope it answers. It was very brief.
Yes, it does. Thank you. And it's also something that we've also said about that in the Swedish women's lobby. It's all part of the same industry, that it's very clear that those countries that have legalized altruistic surrogacy, they can also see that that will increase demand and it will feed into the global commercial surrogacy. So it's not possible really to differentiate between commercial and altruistic surrogacy. We also had a question that I think was directly to you. Do you think that the part of the battle in this topic is the fight against the erasure of the word women in legislations?
Could you repeat? Sorry, I didn't.
The question went like this. Do you think that part of the battle in this topic is the fight against the erasure of the word women in legislations?
Absolutely. I'm thinking about the Argentinian case where you have an abortion law that is not exclusively on women. We need to understand who we are as women. We need to affirm we are women. We need to understand what that means in our life, and not just under patriarchy, because we focus a lot on violence, but without the violence, who we are, those things remain. Pregnancy remain, menstruations remain, and they're not necessarily negative, even though painful and all of this. But it really is a fight against women. That is certain.
Also, one last question for you. I was thinking, as a young feminist and working with young women and girls with migrant backgrounds, do you want to say something about like the racist nature that's inherent in the surrogacy industry?
Oh, well, yeah, I think I should open up to to other speakers as well. Well, it is pretty clear, even outsourcing pregnancy, to me, it's clear. It's taken from the industrial idea of you take it to the East. And then you have specific requests based on the skin color. So this is obviously a racist industry. But perhaps others want to add something more, because that's too much.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you. Thank you to all of our speakers and to all of you that have been listening for this event. And I hope that you will join our common struggle to fight surrogacy industry, as it is one of the most urgent threats to women's human rights and also a form of violence against women, as has been described so many times tonight. So thank you all.